Welcome to my review of Alien 3, directed by David Fincher and starring Sigourney Weaver. At first instance, it might seem odd that I would discuss this film without discussing Alien and Aliens, the two first installments in the Alien franchise. But there is a reason for that, and that's because I think that Alien 3, out of the Alien films, is by far the most underrated, and I also think it might be the most interesting one to talk about, just by virtue of its very troubled history and backstory in terms of the production, and also just in terms of the film itself. It's a film with a great many layers to the story, to the atmosphere. It's a film that I really do admire, and I think it's a shame that when people look back on the Alien franchise, this is the entry that tends to get overlooked and dismissed, because in my view, despite its troubled production, I think it turns out a very well made, impactful film. Now, in the course of this video, I'll talk about why I admire Alien 3 as much as I do. I'll talk about why I think it wasn't as well received as it might have been, why it wasn't as popular with audiences and with critics as the first two movies, and also some things that I perhaps didn't think worked in the film, because it isn't a perfect movie. And also I will touch on some of that troubled history to the film, because the backstory to the film is almost as fascinating as the film itself. It really was incredible, and it's also I'll get into this later, but it is quite a cautionary tale in some ways in how not to make a film. Now, this review will contain spoilers. I don't know if you can really have spoilers in a film that's been out for 30 years. This was first released in 1992. But just in case, I will talk about plot points. There are two cuts to the film. There is that theatrical version that was released in cinemas in 1992. But in the early 2000s, you had the Alien Quadrilogy DVD, which included the so-called assembly cut of Alien 3, not director's cut, assembly cut, because David Fincher had nothing to do with the final cut of this film. In fact, it's commonly known that he, despite having a very successful film career after Alien 3, he made Seven, he made Fight Club, he made Gone Girl. He never really talks about Alien 3. And I think that's a shame, because his fingerprints are all over it. He has that trademark bleak vision, just really ironically enough, shines through the whole film. But the assembly cut is, I think, widely accepted as the far superior cut of the film. It adds in, I think, about 40 minutes to the runtime, and it makes the pace far more even. It gives a lot more character development. There's plot points that actually go somewhere in the assembly cut, whereas in the theatrical cut they don't. And overall, it makes it a far more well-rounded and more complete version of the film. So that's the version I'll be referring to throughout this review. To talk a bit about what I admire about the film, the film's vision, the film's atmosphere, the film's story is incredibly bleak. It's quite depressing, I guess, and I think for some people that's what puts them off the film, because right at the start, the entire plot of the film revolves around failure and death. So it starts off with Ripley waking up from cryosleep at the end of after the end of Aliens, which was a very sort of triumphalist sort of action film. And the other characters from that film who she survived with have now died. They've died off camera, and I understand that upset quite a lot of people who are a fan of Aliens. But to my mind, I think it works because it sets the tone of the film as one that is quite unrelentingly desperate and grim. And it works. I mean, I think the trilogy, the Alien trilogy, as I'm going to call it. I'm ignoring Alien Resurrection. Alien has the themes of birth, of something new. Aliens has themes of motherhood, so it's someone in their prime. Alien 3 is all about death and decay, and there's religious sort of allusions and iconography throughout the film that sort of help build that overall picture. Um, the the plot of the film is simple enough. All of the Alien films really have the same plot points. It's just handled in different ways by different directors and their own personal styles. Um, throughout the film, it all builds up to Ripley's eventual sacrifice. At the end, Ripley dies to stop the company getting a hold of the alien and sort of monetizing it, which is such a perfect end to the trilogy. It really gives it a great deal of closure. It doesn't leave any wiggle room for a sequel, but unfortunately they did in fact make one. As I said, the atmosphere, the feel of this film, right down to the story, right down to the cinematography, right down to the way it's lit, the way it's shot, is perfect, and it all goes towards this bleak vision. Unsurprisingly, a lot of it was filmed. A lot of it was filmed in the. This is going to sound quite unfortunate, but it was filmed in the north of England, and there's a scene in the beginning with Charles Dance's character when he walks alone outside, and I'm assuming it was like a quarry or something that they filmed it in, but the film feels like an alien movie set in like some really grim post-industrial town in the north of England. It really has that sort of bitter, grey, grimy feel to it, which really adds to the story, and of course it's helped by the fact that the film is very well cast. It's a mixture, mostly British actors, some American actors, and it's quite strange because it sometimes feels like you're watching a BBC drama from like the 90s or something, just with all of, you see so many faces in the film, and I watched it in preparation for this review, and I found myself pausing it quite often because certain faces of the prisoners in the film are familiar, and you look them up on Wikipedia, and sure enough, one of them starred in an episode of Doctor Who, one of them was in an episode of Life on Mars, one of them was in an episode of Sherlock. I mean, there really is a lot of sort of famous, well, B-list British sort of TV and movie stars. Charles Dance is excellent in the film. His character's probably the best, second to Ripley. There's other actors in there. There's Ralph Brown, who is he was in Life on Mars actually. Brian Glover shows up. He was famous for doing the show Porridge in the UK. So it's quite entertaining to watch from that perspective. I think it is very very well cast. The dialogue in the film as well, I think, is pretty good. There's a lot of discussions between characters, showing their points of view about the world and about what's happened to them. Charles Dance has a fantastic monologue in the film where he discusses his backstory, and it's really really heartbreaking. It's very very well written. It's very well delivered. Um, Unfortunately, undercut by the fact that he immediately dies after that monologue is given, which I didn't really care for too much. I think they could have kept him alive, but again, it paints that bleak picture, doesn't it? Here's this character, we've just given him a lot of backstory, but you think he's safe until the end of the film, perhaps, but no, he's gone. Um, it's a very gloomy film, but so much in it is great. And I think the thing I like most about it probably is the arc that they give Sigourney Weaver's character, Ripley, throughout the three Alien films, bringing it home in this film by having her fight the alien one last time, and then she ultimately sacrificed herself. I think it's perfect. I think that aspect of the film is just perfectly done. The cinematography of it is just perfect. That's especially that ending scene, and the music as well. The music is it's quite unique actually. It's different to the first two films. There's a lot of sort of choirs used. It's more all the all the soundtrack titles have like religious themes. There's Adagio and Agnus Dei. It really it feels like some sort of it doesn't hit you over the head with the religious allusions. It's not like a Batman v Superman sort of ordeal, but it handles it intelligently, and it makes for quite an engrossing, um, bleak film. Um, but it's not just bleak. I think I should point out there's a counterbalance there. It's bleak, but there is a redemption in the film. Sigourney Weaver ultimately redeems herself, redeems her character um, by the final act of the film. And I think that's the core to it, behind all the bleakness, and I think that's what makes it so powerful. So I've discussed really why I admire the film. Um, why do I think people didn't warm to it? Well, when you watch a film like Aliens, now Aliens is a classic 80s adrenaline action romp. I mean, it's so filled with energy and action. I think coming off that high towards like a sort of depressing character piece, which Alien 3 is, I can understand people being disappointed and people not warming to it. I really do, and I think I acknowledge that killing off the two of the main characters from the previous film that were really well established and really well liked was upsetting for some people. I understand that, but I personally, viewing the trilogy as a whole, I think it works. I don't think those two characters would have worked well in Alien 3. I don't think having a 12-year-old girl running around the prison would have really gelled well. So I understand why they did it. Um, and I think the reason the film does feel clunky in parts, the reason that one of the reasons that it didn't really turn out in the way that people thought it would is simply because there was just so much drama behind the scenes. The film went through about 10 different writers in pre-production. The 20th Century Fox had spent $13 million before cameras were even rolling. Now, I would strongly encourage you, if you like this film, if you're interested in it, to watch the 3-hour documentary on the Alien Quadrilogy DVD set. I mean, that box set of DVDs is fantastic for special features. They really go in depth, and I think the Alien 3 documentary is the most fascinating, because some of the stories that were in the pipeline for this movie were a mixture of insane and brilliant. So it was first conceived as an action film. Some people had talked about the idea that Michael Biehn, the action star from Aliens, would now become the main character, and Ripley would, I think they planned to put her in a coma for most of the film, which is a terrible, terrible decision. I don't understand why they would want to sort of sideline, probably the greatest female action star of all time. But that was one of the ideas. I think Michael Biehn ended up being quite unhappy that he wasn't in Alien 3. He sued them for quite a large sum of money because they used his likeness at the very start of the film. I think he was actually paid more for his likeness than he was for his whole role in Aliens, which is quite staggering, really. There was one idea of the film where the villains were these space communists, which they did away with after 1989 or 91, whenever the Berlin Wall fell, because they realised that communism was now sort of retro almost. It was outdated. There was obviously the most famous idea that they had for Alien 3 was that the film would be set on Earth. The first teaser trailer for the film implies that the film will be set on Earth, and there was concept art that you can see where the aliens were like on a farm somewhere on Earth, presumably in the United States, which immediately makes you think of M. Night Shyamalan's Signs, which I think is a better way to do that concept and having the having the aliens from the Alien franchise in it. Ultimately, the story ended up being conceived by Vincent Ward, who decided to move the film away from action, so it wasn't going to be in the veil of aliens. It was going to be more like the first Alien, the Ridley Scott film, which is what we ended up with. And a lot of the ideas that were in his draft of the story ended up being in the final version. Although his was quite curious. Vincent Ward's first draft of the story involved a very high concept, like planet made of wood, that was inhabited by a group of monks, and then Ripley crash landed there with the alien. So you had the monks, you had the religious allusions brought in quite early. Eventually, the idea changed to being a prison planet, which is what we ended up with. The film was generally overproduced. It's what happens when you get too many cooks in the kitchen. Ultimately, David Fincher had an idea for the film. He had a good idea for the film, but because he was a first-time director, he'd only done, I think, music videos prior to this. The studio, 20th Century Fox, just weren't interested in letting him have his vision realised. Now, ultimately, filmmaking is a collaborative process. It's up to the director to listen to people, to listen to actors, the director of photography, the editor, the special effects people, to listen to how to make a film. But really, there needs to be someone making the key decisions. The director needs to be able to make executive decisions sometimes about certain things. And sadly, in Alien 3's case, a lot of what he wanted to be in the film, the studio just decided to override him, which is a shame. And I think I would be really interested one day to see if there truly was a director's cut that showed you what David Fincher wanted to happen with the film. Now, the finished film, I talked about what I liked about the film. There's no denying it's not a perfect movie, even in its most realised form in the assembly cut. There's the obvious plot hole at the very, very, very start, which is how on earth did the alien egg get on the spaceship from Aliens? I'm sure if I looked on Google, there would be lots of fan theories as to how this happened, but it's never, from what you see in the film, it's never explained. From what you see in the previous film, it's never explained. So that's just something that you need. I mean, I've always just tried to ignore, because it doesn't affect the story, but it is unusual that they didn't try to justify it in some way. Upon review, I had always thought that prior to watching the documentary, I had always thought that the special effects in this film were a mix of puppetry and CGI. It came out in 1992, which was the year before Jurassic Park. So CGI was starting to become a thing, and I just assumed some of the shots looked really sort of erratic, really jerky, very fluid in some cases, and I always just thought that it had to be CGI. It actually wasn't. The alien in this film was in most scenes, it was a mixture of puppetry and rod puppets, and the scenes where it looks really jerky and unnatural are, unfortunately, the rod puppets. And it's a shame because the special effects, they do not hold up in this film, and it's distracting, especially compared with Alien and Aliens, where they took a more sort of minimalist approach with the design of them. There's some, I'm assuming, rear screen projection shots in the film, which really don't look balanced. The colours and the shadows just look all wrong. So that side of the film is a bit of a letdown. Although there's one special effects part of the film that's excellent, and that is when Ripley speaks to the smashed up version of the Bishop robot from the previous film. I'd always thought that was the actor there, just under lots of makeup, but it's not. It was a fully conceived animatronic puppet, which looks excellent. It's really, really well done. And then the final thing I should talk about is, if you're going to view this as a horror film, which it was kind of marketed as, it doesn't really succeed. It's not scary and suspenseful in the way that the first Alien film is. One or two scenes maybe, but overall not really. And sorry, one other thing, the alien, in terms of the special effects, the alien changes size noticeably throughout the film, and I think this is because the studio and David Fincher had different ideas for what the alien would burst out of at the start of the film. In the studios, in the theatrical version, which the studio approved, it bursts out of a dog, whereas in Fincher's version, it bursts out of an ox. The idea being that an ox had, sort of biblical connotations. So sometimes you see the alien and it looks massive. It looks about 12 feet tall, and that must, I'm assuming that was from Fincher's version where it came out of an ox. But then there's some versions where it's a lot more dog-like. It's coming up and down the walls, and it's a lot smaller. It's smaller than it stands upright, and it's about smaller than the height of a man. So that jumps out as an inconsistency. But overall, I have to return to my original comments on the film, which are that I think Alien 3 is a very worthy end to the Alien trilogy. It's a film that in fact, I'm going to say I think it's the perfect conclusion to the Alien trilogy. It's not a perfect film, but it is a perfect conclusion. I think it really brings home all of the themes of the first three Alien films, which are that the alien has pretty much ruined Ripley's life. The hubris of the second film didn't really last, and ultimately everything dies. And with this film, the franchise closes at the end. Ripley's character dies, and that should have been a perfect dramatic conclusion. And really, that's the best way to view this film. It's not a horror film like the first Alien film. It's not an action film like the second. It's a dramatic character study of Ripley, really. And I think it's a film that begs repeat viewings. It's a film that, if you didn't like it the first time, read a bit about the pre-production of it. Look at it again, just accepting some of its flaws, and see that it is a very well conceived film, and one that I'm looking forward to watching again. So as for a rating, I'm going to give it a 77 out of 100, and that's for the assembly cut.